你的大名啊，没有听过啊，very good。很好朋友啊。
本来就叫我没有空。
是，但是你写文章写得很厉害啊，是吗？就是他哦，就是你啊，谢谢，非常好啊。啊，是的，先生那边Symposium那边哦，你可以 ask question，可以写。写得很好，我没有看过，对呀，是我先生写得很好啊。他站在我后面，现在很喜欢重要的。Chief editor, writer, you will say for us.
Okay, how?
It is a big character. Okay, so younger. Happy, right? So many years already. Actually, many years. I remember we were in the committee at the school. So which school are you in? Sengkang side. Sengkang side. Still a principal. Thank you.
Became popular because more modern.
Are you serious?
没错的也是。
这个是也是尝试也可以，用写的也是没有问题。
写可以，然后
写可以，这边可以用写。
这些把它这里的啊，才看懂这个，这个没有了，没有了。
Oh, congratulations.
That's my sister.
Congratulations.
Oh, is it? Now, tonight we're going to have this topic, and this symposium is being moderated by Mr. Lo Siwi, who is the director of the National Gallery Singapore. He's the moderator. We have the panel of speakers, who is Mr. Loh Ki Chun, who is an art historian and critics, Mr. Kwok Kien Chow, who is an art advisor and a writer, Dr. Heng Chai Kien, who is a professor, Dean, School of Design and Environment, NUS, and last but not least, Dr. Winston Ho, who is a watercolor artist and art lover. So, without further ado, we will start the symposium with the moderator, Mr. Loh. Up to you.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's symposium, really held in conjunction with the exhibition and the book launch that will happen very shortly. We have a very diverse panel with us today who are able to share with us greater insights about the artist, the late Fang Changqian. What I propose to do is to really introduce the speaker as they come on, and we'll be following the sequence up there, starting with Kien Chow. And my job actually this evening is very easy. I'm the timekeeper, basically. We have to go back to the main hall at about 7 p.m. for the book launch. And so therefore, each speaker, I would like to ask your cooperation to keep your talk to about 10 minutes. So then that will leave us for another 10 minutes towards the end for questions and answers from the floor, right? So without further delay, our first speaker is Mr. Kwok Kien Chow, art historian, senior advisor to the National Gallery, as well as, of course, the museum director who was responsible for organizing Fang Changqian's retrospective exhibition at the Singapore Art Museum in the 1990s. So may we now invite Kien Chow to share with us.
Thank you. We are having here an exhibition, a symposium here, but most of all is a book launch. And this book contains masterpieces of Fang Changqian. And also, the very special thing about this project is that all the inscriptions in Fang's painting are being transcribed and translated by none other, the daughter, the son-in-law. Now, there is concern as to whether the literati tradition continues in Singapore. I think it continues in a very beautiful way, in the way this publication is being put together in 2 languages, and also the way that the younger generation would better understand the tradition of the literati painting in Singapore, and the way the history unfolded in a very special way in Singapore, and now it becomes multicultural and multilingual. So in that sense, it is very important for us to go back to understand Fang Changqian and his cultural context and background. And in order for us to take this further, it may not be known as literati art from here onwards. That is up to the scholars to give it a different different name. Now, however, it is important for us to appreciate the history and spirit of Fang Changqian. Now, can we look at the very first image I have selected? Now, of course, when it comes to Chinese landscape painting, when it comes to 20th century, there's of course the great concern as to how do we go in the direction of naturalism, meaning that to be realistic about the painting style, or to continue in the Chinese calligraphic tradition. And what Fang Changqian has done is to integrate the two in the way that the spirit of literati painting is captured through a very conventional landscape, and yet there is interest in naturalism, meaning that to try to capture scenery as you see it. Now, this is very much so in his landscape painting, but also, very much so in his bamboo painting. The next one, please. Now, Fan Changqian was very much a bamboo painter, and he has is known by gardener Yuan Ding as his name. And the idea of bamboo for Fan Changqian is very much the idea of art instruction, very much a kind of a cultivator, a continuation of culture. And this is very much said by one of his students, Choi Kei, who said that learning from Fan Changqian, he understood the importance of not just creating or painting art, but also continuation of a tradition. So he says, 从业范昌前承受海派艺术传承，在日后创作上呢，有如盘之积淀。So this provided the younger artists a foundation in painting and in the continuation of the literati tradition. 这不只是一个画派所专有的这个根基呢，所属有的一个根基，但其所涉猎者竟是中华文化之宝藏。So it's a continuation of Chinese tradition, it's a continuation of Chinese aesthetics. 诗词的涉猎也开拓我日后对作品中意境的掌握。And the understanding of 意境, which is a realm, a kind of aesthetic realm that the artist should try to achieve, is done through understanding and the instruction of Fan Changqian's teaching. Now, so Fan has said that, you see, Fan Changqian actually, of course, came from China, so he felt a kind of distance with the environment. So he says, he tried to justify his being in Southeast Asia. So he said, 漫溯南邦无好朴，探求道众莫高深。So who says that one cannot find the culture so-called in the South? But look again, there are fine examples around. And Fan has a certain sense of history and tradition, and hence he said, 胸穷品物无古今，笑对实情风不同。Treasure the past and present subjects equally, smile to face all different situations staunchly. And this is very much about the basic spirit of the literati tradition. It is very much, the emphasis is very much on the individual, but also the individual's role and position in a kind of a larger a river of time and history, and that it is the holistic, comprehensive learning that is the emphasis of literati art. It is further an integration of different forms of art that it must include calligraphy, also poetry, as well as seal carving as a kind of a comprehensive total art form that is expressed not just through the painted imagery, but also these other art forms coming together in an integrated way. You see, Fan Changqian spent about half his time in China and half of his time in Southeast Asia and in Singapore. And he was very much concerned about how to continue the tradition to bring, even with the kind of physical environment that one could no longer see in China. And he resolved all this by accepting the physical environment in Southeast Asia and in Singapore and taking this further. And because the literati instruction is based on a kind of a personal teaching, and for about 20 years of his life, he started giving instruction in a private studio. And this is when, he actually taught one whole generation of artists in Singapore. All the major ink painters in Singapore actually came from this kind of a cultural context, this kind of aesthetic value that Fan Changqian imparted. Artists like Wang Geyi spoke of Fan Changqian's work as 一如野和诗书画, that he has integrated together the poetry, the calligraphy, and painting as kind of a melting pot. And this is the great achievement of Fan Changqian.
Thank you, Ken Chao. The next speaker that we have is Professor Heng Chai Kiang, and he comes from the School of Design and Environment, but more importantly, possibly the last student of Fan Changqian. So I think we'll be able to hear from him much deeper personal insights to a number of Fan's paintings. Yeah, Professor Heng.
Good evening. In fact, the only qualification I have sitting up here is because I think I'm the last student that studied with him, together with Li Suzhi. Suzhi is somewhere here. Yes, she's there. I think we were studying together. Unfortunately, when I asked Mr. Nai, I said, how long did you study with Mr. Fang? He says, since the 60s. I started learning only in probably 85, 86. And shortly after, for about 2 years, and I had to leave for my studies, and Fang Lao Si also was taken ill. So, in fact, I'm very happy to see this exhibition being held here in honor of him, and I really speak in honor of him. And but I also have this great regret that I did not spend more time studying with him. Because it is not just, I think it's more than just studying art, per se. When you look at his art, it is more than art. It is the whole character of this man in his paintings. A moment ago, Ken Chao was talking about his bamboo. For one thing, I love bamboo. I plant bamboo in my garden. And I looked at all sorts of bamboos from different artists. But I think if you look at his bamboo is basically him. It's a kind of 脱俗, 世俗. He's above the consumerism, the pursuit of name and fame. And so if you look at his painting of bamboo, there's this. It's very difficult to explain. You look at his and you look at others. The others, there'll be, especially towards the later part of his life. When I studied with him, it was really towards the later part of his life. And he's very personal in teaching you. He'll paint, he'll show you how to paint it, and explain to you, of course, the techniques of doing it. But I think more than techniques is the way he also, he basically does it. Or when he was teaching us, he did it as if he was improvising all along. So, in fact, I would say that it's really, when he was painting it, it was just improvisation. Improvisation with, I don't know whether you agree, but with the kind of freedom that is of course acquired over an entire lifetime. So we always say it's basically a whole lifetime in 10 minutes. A painting like that may take him 15 to 20 minutes, or the bigger one a bit more. But there's a whole lifetime of cultivating this skill, but also the character that goes with it, and that extra 15, 20 minutes of it. Very later on, when you look at well, let's move to the next painting. Okay. if you look at all these paintings here, for example, the bamboo again, there is, in its composition, very typically would be these very skinny bamboos, sometimes contrasted with the fatter ones. The bamboo stems are absolutely amazing. They are rendered in all the 3D effects of light and texture. And usually this is more typical of his bamboo, which is a combination of both the dense and the less dense. But out there is one very atypical painting where somewhere out in the towards the front, where you don't see this dense and dispersed. So let's call it dense and dispersed. But instead, the painting that is out there, which I've not selected, is far more evenly distributed. I think that was deliberate, very, very deliberate. The reason I chose this set of paintings is because of again, it is black and white, showing a kind of, again, I would say, I can only say his paintings are completely Tosu. There's nothing of the commercial world in it. It's this literati standing above everything else, not concerned about pursuit of fame and glory. Can I have the next one? Yeah. I chose the next one because of its special composition also. Well, from my two years of experience with him, he painted very few paintings of bamboo drooping down, few. I personally had one that he gave to me, which is a very dense growth of bamboo, all drooping down with a few birds, a few sparrows flying through it. It was in the other catalogue in the 90s. So this is one where he contrasted the very, very thick bamboo stem with those that are very thin, and with all the as I said, the dense and the less dense, all very well composed. This will be quite a typical composition of dense and less dense. But again, the composition of the bamboo in this particular angle is far less typical. Yeah. Let's move to the next one. I mean, when I look at this, I'm just speechless. In such few strokes, in just such few strokes and depth of ink, he depicted the god and the leaves in all its yes, he basically painted them. I mean, and those vines and the birds. Look at the two sparrows, which I deliberately put a detail here. So simple, and yet the spirit of the birds, you can almost hear them sing. Let's move on to the next one. This is one of my favorite. In fact, I've seen one set of 4 where he showed different birds in different, well, this is one of them, and there was one with the Parker, the myna. All of them so atmospheric, so intense. This one you can almost imagine these geese coming back, and look at the two birds looking at each other. And then those reeds, again, there are a few paintings out there. I was just admiring how marvelously free those strokes are. In fact, the one with the heron out there, it's almost like an abstract painting. If you look at the reeds and the strokes, the brush strokes. And he always taught us how to control the moisture of in the stroke to achieve a kind of ren, the quality of ren. How do you pronounce? How do you talk about ren? Anyway, can I move to the next one? This fish. Again, I think this is towards the later part of his life. Again, very, very few brushstrokes, and you can see those fish swimming through those seaweeds, water weeds. Everything is there. I mean, there's no depiction of water. You don't need to. It's just the depth of ink, the different shades of gray, and sometimes a little bit of blue. And the fish, again, looks as if they're swimming. But unfortunately, these are things that I see in his paintings, but never learned from him. Can I look at the next slide? This is probably the last one, I think. I chose this because I think this is in a collection of museum. During one of the sessions, one of the lessons, every Sunday we'll go to his house in the morning to learn how to paint. He showed us a long hand scroll by Zhu Wenyun. So he's his teacher. And it's a hand scroll of bamboos. Hand scroll of bamboo. A hand scroll of bamboo is quite difficult to paint. And the composition is, as far as I can recall, there are some similarities. When I look at this, I recall the other painting that you showed me. I inquired about this painting, but unfortunately, I think we couldn't have, we don't know where it is. You probably have seen it. Wonderful. And this one is really, I think, captures the same spirit, but in orchids. And I showed a detail of the rock that does a diagonal across this painting. Basically, when you roll that, I mean, if you were to read a hand scroll, you unscroll it, but of course, when you unscroll it, you can then see how your eyes are being led from one register in the painting up to another register. So from one corner of painting, it brings you up and then come down again. So I think it's, again, a compositional element that he used, a device that he used. But the other thing which, I've never able to master is the orchids. The leaves of the orchids is a lifetime of work. It seems so deceptively easy, but it's really, really, really difficult. I think that's probably the last slide, but I said this slide, I think our museum is so lucky to have this particular painting. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Well, thank you, Chai Kiang. We would now like to invite our next speaker, Dr. Winston Oh, a noted philanthropist, arts lover, watercolor artist. And he's going to share with us a very different paintings and analyze them from the perspective of watercolor painting. So we look forward to your talk.
Thank you. Thank you, Siwi. I'm not quite sure why I'm being asked to speak on this panel, because I'm a watercolorist and I'm not bilingual. And here I'm amidst these erudite and eminent painters and academics. So I asked Teresa why she asked me and insisted that I should participate. And she said, Dr. Oh, you remember 20 years ago, I brought my mother to see you in your clinic, and I showed you some of my father's paintings. You looked at them, and you said, after a while, Teresa, these are the works of a master Chinese brush painter. I never heard of him before, don't know him. But there you go. Why are you keeping this vast collection of his paintings at home and not offering them to the Singapore public to appreciate, to enjoy his wonderful work and his legacy? So after 20 years, Teresa now says, yeah, there you go, you see. So I'm rather relieved about that. But that doesn't still solve my problem. Why am I sitting here? So I sort of thought about it, and I decided I'd tell you something about what Teresa wanted me to say, a different take on Fan Chen-Tian's works. So first of all, let me start off by saying I was asked to select two of his paintings, and which I liked. And the first one is this of the prawns. Now, why is this so special to me? The main factors here, the composition and the brushwork. Now, composition is a simple composition, and yet it's elegant, it's balanced, and you see the rhythmic movement of the brushstrokes. Secondly, and there's liveliness there. The brushwork, if you look at it, this painting has been done of 4 prawns, all in different postures and movements, with a very few brush strokes. And every single brush stroke is expertly done and no mistakes done. And the way he did the prawn's bodies, the quick brush strokes like this, loose brush strokes, and the legs, the prawns look alive. It looks as though they're crawling over the paper. And that struck me as such a fantastic painting. Next one, please. My next choice is this orchid painting. Again, I was struck by the composition. Beautifully balanced, full of rhythm. And the brushwork, now if you look at every single leaf of the orchid, it's absolutely correct, no mistakes. And each in different postures, different shapes, different tones. And every single one plays a part. And this is the master. I mean, you and I might do 3 of them looking good, but how do you do about 20 of them like that? Everything perfect. Absolutely marvelous. So brushwork and composition. Next slide. So I'm going to try quickly to make a few points to you to explain why, even as a watercolor painter, I'm able to appreciate the work of a master brush painter. Next slide, please. Now, I will start off by giving you a few examples of English watercolors, 20th century. This is how watercolors are trending towards these days. A masterly painter, Edward Weston, who lived in the first half of the 20th century, he's able to conjure up this watercolor painting. It's only about, 10 by 14 inches or something, in a minimum of brush strokes, very loosely, very quickly. And you see the different quick brush strokes, different tones and small details, but no real details. And yet here is an image of a cold winter's day with some trees in the middle, some fencing, and a river. And it's all done by a minimum of brush strokes. Next, please. And the same artist is able to conjure up this misty, cold winter's day, virtually in black and white. But you look at the way he does it very loosely, very quickly, but controlled composition. And it's a wonderful image. Yet again, you see, economy of brushstrokes. Next slide. And here is another watercolorist, latter day. Same sort of technique as a Chinese brush painter. He uses the same brush strokes, economic movement of brush strokes, very simple brushwork, and yet within a few strokes he's able to conjure up this fantastically light and colorful painting. Next one, please. I'm going to go as fast as I can. This is a living artist today. He paints with a big brush, like we all do, very quickly, loosely, and you can see in the same fashion he's able to conjure up this image of 2 horses moving along briskly, and the body language and the movement is all there. Not unlike a Chinese brush painter. Next, please. So these are the points I'm drawing up about the comparability of the 2 media. The composition is very important, always important in any artwork. The quality of the brushstrokes and the economy of brushstrokes, ability to paint an image with a minimum of brushstrokes. Please, next one. Now, I'm going to go a bit further and show you the comparable instruments we use as painters. Brushes. Next one. These are the brushes that I use and a lot of British artists use. And you see how similar it is to the Chinese brush painter. The main quality properties of these brushes is it's got to have a fat belly to be able to hold plenty of water, and they have to come to a fine point so you can maneuver and create different images with a single brush. Next one, please. And this is how Fan Zhangtian does these bold, brisk strokes of the leaves of this palm tree. There's so much life in it, and it's variable in tone, and no leaf are the same, no 2 leaves are the same. Next one, please. And here, the British artist does it with a similar brush, bold, rapid paint brushes, no detail. And here you have this wonderful composition with the image of 2 horses running along on the seashore. Next, please. Now, this is Fan Zhangtian's painting of a hen, and you see the body of the hen is black and gray washes, maybe 5, 6 strokes of the brush. Next one, please. And here is John Yarley, the same artist we just looked at, and he paints his geese, again, is virtually black and white, in about 5 or 6 strokes. So you see the similarities coming out. Next, please. Now, pigments. Next, please. The paints that we use are actually comparable. They're water-soluble paints, dissolve in water, and you put the paints on in bold strokes, washes, or more detailed flowers like this, and the leaves. Next, please. And a British watercolors, another one, early 20th century, same brisk brush strokes, same application of the paint to give you the image of roses with a minimum of brush strokes. Next, please. Now, paper format is another aspect. You see, Chinese brush painting obviously originates with the scroll fashion of your paper, because of Chinese calligraphy. Is the shape of the paper, or the format, I call it, determines the type of compositions you can make, you see, which is why Chinese paintings are so unique, because they have these long formats, which Western painters, watercolors don't normally use. Next, please. Now, in his latter years, I noticed that Fan Zheng was painting quite a lot in these smaller versions, but in the conventional portrait shape. And you see how his compositions are changed. They see more like the paintings that the Western painters do. Next, please. So the format of the painting is important, you see. And here is quite a well-known watercolorist, no longer alive, but he adopted this upright composition and uses simple, almost like a Chinese brush painting composition. He, incidentally, is very famous for his nubile Spanish nudes, but that's beside the point. Next one, please. And the same type of composition with simple, there's a foliage there, and a beautifully balanced painting. So you see what I'm trying to get at. Next, please. So finally, I will quickly touch on the paper. Now this determines how we paint, you see, and how Chinese brush painter paints. Basically, we use the same paper. It's a natural paper. Chinese rice paper, watercolors, you use cotton often, cotton rags. The difference is the gelatin. Now, Chinese rice paper is very thin and it's very absorbent. It's like blotting paper. You put the paint on, the water sinks in straight away and the paint is deposited there. You can't do much more with that layer of paint. In watercolors, the gelatin is a water repellent. So what you do is when you're mixing it to make the paper, it lets the water sit on the paper without sinking in so fast. Now this layer of water on top is very important. Next, please. And with putting on pigments onto a wet paper surface, which is not sinking in so fast, you can maneuver different colors of pigments on the paper to get different colors, different tones, and you get this soft, misty effect. Next, please. Similarly, this is a painting in Bali. You see the sky colors, and they're all blending smoothly into each other. And in the sand, there's the different colors on the black sand, and you know, this volcanic sand. All the colors just quietly blending in. You can't do this in Chinese brush painting because the water just sinks in, you see. So next, please. So what I'm just showing you the different colors blending in the shadows of these things and the ceramic pots. Next, please. So now coming back to Chinese brush painting, you artists are cleverer than we are, you see. Now, because you cannot mix paints on the paper, you mix your paints in your brush. So you see, doing the bamboo, Professor Heng will vouch for me, you use the brush like I showed you the fat belly, you put the dilute ink in the middle of the brush, in the belly, then you put the strong ink, black ink at the tip of the brush, and when you brush it along like that, you got your bamboo stem, all in one stroke. Because you can't maneuver the paint, it all could be done in one go. Next slide, please. And more or less the final slide. Now, if you look at the foliage, the green leaves and the flowers, the green leaves have different colors in it. A grade of yellow and green and then black. That's all done in one stroke because the artist, because of the limitations of paper, he puts the yellow in the belly of the paint brush, a bit of green, and then he puts black in the tip. So when he does that stroke, it all comes out in different colors, one stroke. Because you can't mix, it's all done in one go. It's much cleverer than us, you see. much more skillful. Same with the flower petals. Now, if you look at the foliage in the middle, there are two colors there, but you can see they're distinct because they have to be laid down one after the other. You can't mix them on the paper. That's only a subtle difference. Basically, it's the same pigment, the same technique, same brushes. All right? So that's probably the end of that, isn't it? It's no more. Yeah, thank you. So then now you understand why, as a watercolorist, I'm still able to appreciate the subtleties and the elegance and the skill of this master painter, Fan Xiantian. I thank you.
Thank you, Winston. And I guess to bring this symposium to a full circle, we now go back to Mr. Nai Swee Ling, one of Mr. Fan's oldest students, had studied with Mr. Fan as a young student in Whampoa School, and then subsequently was an ongoing student visiting Mr. Fan at home. So could we invite Mr. Nai to say a few words? 赖老师。
大家晚上好，主席好，还有范大姐都好啊。今晚听了很多专家的对我老师的分析，我们得益匪浅，谢谢你们，谢谢。我今天是2个身份的代表，一个身份是刘其俊先生，他本来是今晚的也是参与这个讲座的人，但是他很对不起，他临时有事在越南，所以他要我代表他向各位道歉，说声对不起。另外一个身份呢，我是代表范老师的学生，因为今晚来的学生也可能不少，所以我想讲几句话。这个我们的这个学生里面当时是分成几批，就是几个时期。那个我是属于第2期的吧，还有刘韵这些。当时我们跟老师学画的时候，是完全投入的，老师没有收学费的。所以在华人的传统里面，我们这个叫做入室弟子。所以当时的入室弟子不少，老师有时候在家里还要准备吃的给我们，还留我们吃饭，说：“哎，瑞龙你别跑，今晚有鸡吃。”那我们当时家境也不是很好，所以整天就泡在老师家里。又看他画画，听他讲理论，听他讲人生的过程，那么今天老师离开我们已经28年了，在28年里面我们的范老师的家庭经过重重的困难要替老师出一本画集，比较像样的画集。但一路来一直在筹备，经过千山万水，困难重重，今天终于这个画册跟画展如期举行，这个完全要感谢大哥跟大姐，没有他的坚持，这些一切的费用都是出自他们自己私人的手了，这个非常了不起，所以在此我们给他们2位一个掌声。那么，在我们当时的学生里面，第一批的有林子颖，还有黄富正，他们是中正学校的。那么我们这批比较多的陈友炳赖瑞龙刘韵陈少义，这些是属于黄埔的，所以我们这2批里面都是没交学费的，所以我们欠老师太多了，不但跟他学习做人，还有在那边学了这个终身享用不尽的那个 这个绘画技术。那么，在我们的过程，为什么我们这么尊崇老师？因为老师的人品很高，他一向不求闻大，不故意去求名，但是名当然是不是求就有的。人家艺术界对他都非常的尊崇。我记得我本身后来我就也去了美专学西洋画，也认识了一班老师。当时我们跟范老师学就是这样学，也不觉得说他的造诣有这么高啊，因为没得比较嘛。那么当时我们就在美专听到施香团老师，还有另外一位黄在林老师。黄在林老师说：“你的老师在新加坡吗？这个范老师他是山头很有名的一个画家，他怎么住在新加坡都没人知道。”所以可见得他多么低调的一个人。他说。黄在林先生当时是山头的教育区长，所以他说久闻这个范老师的名都没有机会见到他，啊，他因为当时范老师在山头是主持这个一间美术学校，叫做昌明艺专嘛啊，那么就很多人都很崇拜他。那么后来因为战争的关系，他辗转之间啊，香港啊、泰国就来到新加坡，那么范老师对我们学生，他慈爱又严格，人品是绝对不能够稍微差错的，所以他在画画方面啊，他追崇的是最高的境界的东西。你看他。一个画家里面，我们可以从他的印里面去看到，他的印常常都是有些超现实安贫乐道怕俗看，这些都是表现出一个画家内心的那个品德。所以范老师这么难得的一位老师，我们同时也无形中这些学生也跟他家里建立了非常密切的关系，所以今天范老师能够如期的举行这个画展跟新书发布会，我想这是一个最好最圆满的开始。那么希望老师的画作跟他的人品以后能够在世界各地发扬光大。谢谢各位。
Thank you, Mr. Nai. Maybe I just provide a very brief summary in case for our friends here who are not familiar with Chinese. Well, essentially, Mr. Nai was one of Fan Changqian's earlier students. He recalled that essentially Mr. Fan's students were from two batches. His early students from Zhongzheng when he was teaching there, and subsequently when Mr. Fan was teaching in Wangpo Secondary School, another group of students started to study with Mr. Fan. And these two batches of students were really disciples of Mr. Fan, and Mr. Fan never charged any fees for these students, and in fact often invited them to his home and invited them for meals, so really became part of his larger family, if you will. Mr. Nai recalled looking at the various inscriptions that the artist wrote on his paintings, that really Mr. Fan was a very private, kind of a very humble person, and despite the fact that he was already a very well-known artist in Shantou, many people in Singapore during his time here wasn't aware that he had such a high status back in China. And I think lastly, he wanted to really commend Teresa and Paul for spending the time to put together this exhibition and this publication, which is something that many of Mr. Fan's former students had always wanted to do after he had passed on. So he wanted to thank the family. Yeah. So maybe in the last 10 minutes that we have, Could we invite any questions or comments from the floor? Do take the opportunity to ask our panelists any questions, or even Teresa and Paul could help to answer some questions. 观众有什么疑问或者要发表的话，请尽量争取时间。Yes, Mr. Choi.
First, I'd like to say I enjoyed all the speakers' revelations. Very wonderful. I want to take this opportunity to say something because I feel very strongly about it. I think a lot of good things have been said about Mr. Pham. I think one thing that I seldom hear it discussed is the fact that he made a great contribution to Singapore art. He made a great contribution to Singapore art. I don't know how to put this a bit abstract. From the point of legacy, he brought to Singapore the great legacy of Wu Chang-suk, the Shanghai School. Now I'm not going to look into that, we leave it to the historian and all that. The Shanghai School actually broke into the Chinese art and brought along a lot of fresh ideas, and some are close to the European ideas. That's why Dr. O is able to all that. Now, however, I just give two elements about the Shanghai School, the legacy that Mr. Pham brought to Singapore. And maybe because of the timing, Singapore is not very good in appreciating these things because we are a very practical nation and go very fast and solving problems and all that. But these things, I think, now gets more important, this legacy thing. Now, one is when looking at the pictures, as shown by Dr. O's collection, I'm reminded that Mr. Pham and therefore Wu Chang-sik, the great master, they are not just painters. I've been studying because I'm an artist. They are poets. They are poets who are painters. When they paint poetry. I wish I had that. When I paint techniques, you know. So a friend say, yeah, that's good. The perspective is right. That's not good enough. When I look at these slides, and they are only slides, I feel a touch of poetry, the way they use the space, the stroke that Dr. O has spoken about. I just feel it. And I can imagine looking at the real thing. So they have this. When I look at Wu Chang-suk's work once in Taiwan, I felt the same thing. And that is one thing. They are poets and artists. The other thing about the legacy, this is the way I look at it, is that what Mr. Pham has given Singapore that we haven't quite fully appreciated is the idea of passing down, may I say, secrets. The secrets that Wu Chang-sik invented, if you like. And the Shanghai School artists have passed them down so seriously. You know? We tend to lack things like that. Have we passed down Chong Su-ping's secrets very seriously? Thank you very much.
Maybe we have time for one more question or comment. Anyone else from the floor? One of the great things coming out from this publication really is the rediscovery for me of Mr. Pham as a poet. I think he's probably the last of his generation to be able to compose in classical Chinese, and even amongst the pioneer artists of Singapore, very few could compose original Chinese classical poem, and he was one of these rare individuals who could do so. And I think Teresa and Paul has done us a wonderful service by not only transcribing the calligraphy, which is written in cursive calligraphy, but also translating them so that we now kind of have another way to look at Pham Chang-Chien's paintings and better appreciate, I think, his state of mind when he was painting these works. Yeah, so thank you. Yes?
In relation to that, may I just make one more comment? I'm also very glad that in the publication that you've chosen, I think, two calligraphy, just plain calligraphy, and include it in the publication, because while we see it normally as a colophon, as an inscription in the painting, there you show the calligraphy in full glory. And for those of us who love calligraphy, I mean, it's also an exquisite. He's also an exquisite calligrapher. So we talk about Hua, Su, Si, and Ying. He does everything. The painting was never considered complete until he had written a poem, probably first on a notebook, then onto the painting, and then finally, if he thinks it's good enough, then he would put his seal on it. It's really an accomplished person, very, very, very accomplished literati. Thanks.
We can close. We'll call the symposium to a close. And I'd like to thank my four speakers on the panel for sharing with us your insights. And I'd like to invite now everyone to maybe join us in the next hall for the launch of the book. Thank you.